this is, I believe, part 3 of the ancient fragments, and I think we were on this paragraph here. The cosmogony I shall have occasion to refer to hereafter as one of the most ancient. It is extremely valuable. Don't even sound cool. And as it speaks more plainly than the rest, it affords a key to their interpretation. The generations contain many very curious passages, and the first is an allusion to the fall, and the second, Janus may be Cain, after which we lose traces of similarity. At the fifth, there is an interruption. What the heck? Alright, but taking up the thread of inquiry at the end in Tautus or Thoth, we may recognize Thothus, the second king of Egypt, the Hermes Trismegistus, who again appears as the advisor of Cronus. His predecessor Mizor then responds with Mizraim, the first king of Egypt, the Menes and Mines of the dynasties. Okay, that's a handful right there. So, I mean, I guess because this is in the 1800s, it's going to be in English, so an English person is going to be reading this for certain. So, I think this is what he's saying here when it is extremely valuable as it speaks more plainly than the rest. It affords a key to their interpretation. I think what he's saying here is like, everybody's going to have their own way of explaining this, and this is going to be the way that it's going to be explained in English. I think maybe for some of this maybe mythological stuff, because I don't know, sometimes some of this mythological stuff, it has a very interesting narrative in these older times. And I'm not saying that like in the older times they were they actually were telling the truth or something like that. Not necessarily, but it's interesting to see the perspective now and where the attention is with, I guess, the books that are being written compared to now. And like, why should this book exist in the 1800s? It's a very interesting book. I've gone through it, and I really want to read through it aloud, all of it, because I have only read parts of it. So let's continue. Well, actually, before we continue, this right here too actually is really interesting, with Thoth and Tautus being an advisor of Cronus. And then here he's saying his predecessor Mizor then corresponds with Mizraim, and it's the first king of Egypt. And so I ChatGPT'd this because I was trying to record this earlier, and I just had some audio difficulties. Mizraim is a figure mentioned in the Bible and is traditionally considered the ancestor of the Egyptians. In the Hebrew Bible, he is one of the sons of Ham, who was the son of Noah. Mizraim is often associated with Egypt because in ancient Hebrew, Mizraim is also the common name used to refer to Egypt. In ancient Hebrew, Mizraim, so this is not Aramaic, this is Hebrew, right? They're saying Mizraim is what is referred to as Egypt. What the hell? Mizraim's descendants are listed as the founders of various ancient peoples and regions, particularly in Egypt and the surrounding areas. Some scholars interpret Mizraim as representing the Egyptian people or the early population of Egypt, while others see it as a symbolic broader ancient civilization in northeastern Africa. Well, that's quite interesting. So he's like a... But then, so he's saying here, so... In Hebrew, it would be Mizraim. And in Egypt, it would be Miser. So let me look up... Miser. Sorry, I'm trying to like put this together while I'm reading it. Miser and who is Miser? And Ethos. I'm sorry, my keyboard's kind of long. Maybe I might use my laptop keyboard actually instead. Mizor figures in ancient historical traditions, particularly in the origins of Egyptian civilization. The name Mizor is related to Mizraim, but Mizor is often used in Greco-Roman writings. Oh, okay. Ethos is generally linked as the early Egyptian king or pharaoh. He's often equated with Ager, the pharaoh of the first dynasty, or with Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom. Thothus is mentioned by classical historians such as Manetho, an Egyptian priest and historian, who listed the names of Egyptian kings in his work Egyptica. I don't really know how to pronounce that. In Manetho's account, Thothus is the successor of Menes and ruled as the second pharaoh of Egypt. Yeah, okay, so this is lining up with what this book is saying. Okay, well, I don't know if I should really give the benefit of the doubt to say what this guy is saying is all but more than, I guess, historical truth, or maybe traditional truth, canonical truth, whatever you may call this, and maybe I don't need a reason to keep Googling or ChatGPTing this, so let's continue. In the preceding generation is Amenus, Ammon, or Ham. Okay. The same with Cronus, of what by the historian is supposed to be a different but contemporary line. Okay, so he's saying Ammon, Ham, and Cronus are the same person. Huh. That's fascinating. In the second higher we find Agris, the husbandman, who was worshipped in Phoenicia as the greatest of the gods. Really? Agris? He corresponds with Noah, the Uranus of the other line. Oh, that must be like Greco-Roman, right? And then whose original name was Epigeus or Autochthon? Let me look this up. These are really interesting names I've never heard of. Who is Autochthon? Term derived from Athochanos. It's a Greek word. Autochthonos, from the earth itself, or native. He corresponds with Noah, the Uranus. really know about Greek mythology and Uranus. I'm assuming that this is Uranus. And that's like Greco-Roman mythology, right? If I'm not mistaken. Oh man, I didn't fill up my water bottle. I am going to be having a dry mouth. Sorry about that. Dang. Sanchonia, though, seems to have been a very diligent inquirer and intimates at the conclusion that the generations contain the real history of those early times, stripped of the fictions and allegories which it had been obscured by the son of Thabion, the first hierophant of Phoenicia. So, a Phoenician king started stripping the fictions and allegories and making them obscure. And his name was Thabion, and the first hierophant of Phoenicia. That such is the case, we are assured by Philo-Publius or Philo-Publius in the remarks of Sanchoniathon, with which he prefaces his translation of the work. The passage also informs us that the history thus disguised was handed down to Isirius, the brother of Cana and the first Phoenician, apparently alluding to Mizraim, the brother of Canaan. What the heck? Okay, so Canaan and Mizraim are brothers. Okay, and these are sons of Ham. These are direct sons of Ham. Right? Is Canaan, so Canaan is Canaan son of Ham. It's really interesting. And this is, yes, that's what ChatGPT says. He's a son of Ham. Okay, well, I mean, I guess this is kind of just like, I guess exoteric. This is like exoteric stuff. So I mean, this is nothing. Maybe, I don't know. And this time it might have not been as exoteric. I think this stuff would have been maybe just discovered, being as it would be in the 1800s. Okay. It is very remarkable that he has placed these characters in the true order of succession, though in all the traditions of the heathens they are generally confounded with one another. It is also remarkable that Sanchoniathon is almost the only heathen writer upon the antiquities who makes no direct mention of the deluge. Well, that's an important thing to note. What the hell? He makes no, really. Though several obscure allusions to it may be found in the course of the fragment. Dude, what the heck? That's interesting. That's really interesting. I mean, you would think, these historians, they all say, like, oh, everybody has the flood story, but Sanchoniathon makes no mention of it. And so we know that he's a Phoenician, and that this information was extracted in the early Roman Empire era. So they would have had a lot of land and would have found this information and translated it in Greece, in Byblos, by Philo. This is just a pseudonym. I don't really know. Like a symbolic type of name. Really, really interesting thoughts right there. Were we assured of his silence upon the point in the parts of his work that have been lost, the omission might be accounted for from his avowed determination to suppress what he considered merely allegorical, for he would find the traditions of the deluge so intimately blended with those relating to the creation, that in endeavoring to disengage the truth from the fable, he might easily be induced to suppose that they related to the same event. See, he uses a word that we like to use here on this channel, and that's induced. Interesting. Really, really cool stuff. So intimately blended with those relating to creation. But yeah, so basically what he's saying is that, like, maybe the flood story is not... Okay, imagine we live in this world, right? And imagine for a moment you're being completely lied to, and you have no idea what's going on actually in this earth, and what the origin of it may very well be. Okay? Not saying it is or it isn't, but just imagine, like, you're not told something that happened in the past, and you have no idea of it. He's saying basically this may be the case where traditions of the flood are not, like, present, maybe not exoterically, but maybe through some of their traditions, it's just, like, not there. Maybe the cities that they lived in, or whatever they were talking about or discussing about, was not referring to the Great Flood. So maybe this Great Flood was something that was talked about later. Now to say how later is referring to maybe Sanchoniathon, or referring to maybe Philos, but Philos would have been in the Roman Empire, and I'm pretty sure they would have the flood story have been passed down, so I'm assuming that Sanchoniathon is the culprit for not having the flood story, which would have been in the 1300s or 1400s BC, which is what ChatGPT says that the Sanchoniathon had existed based on Philos or Eusebius, whoever kept hold of the information. But it's Sanchoniathon that doesn't have the flood story, and that's like a huge culprit. I mean, honestly, he goes into the whole extra paragraph about this, and I'm even discussing about this, why that's not there. That's just very interesting. So let's continue. So intimately blended with those relating to the creation, that in endeavoring to disengage the truth from fable might easily be induced to suppose that they related to the same event. So, for explanation of his fragments upon the mystical sacrifice of the Phoenicians, okay, I must refer to the very curious dissertations by Bryan and Mr. Faber. Sanchoniathon wrote also a history of the serpent, a single fragment of which is preserved by Eusebius. In the fragments of Berosus, again we have perhaps some few traces of the antediluvian world. That's interesting. Like Sanchoniathon, Berosus seems to have composed his work with a serious regard for truth. He was a Babylonian by birth, and flourished in the reign of Alexander the Great, and resided for some years at Athens as a priest of Belus. Okay, hold on, let me break this down real quick. I'm quite interested in some of this. Man, I gotta go fill in my water, actually. I'll be right back. It won't take very long. Okay, I think I should start by looking up who Berosus is based on what ChatGPT is going to tell me. So let's check this out. Oops. Berosus. Who is Berosus? Berosus was a Babylonian priest, historian, and scholar who lived during the 3rd century BCE. He is best known for writing a history of Babylon in Greek titled Babyloniaca, the history of Babylonia, which aimed to present Babylonian history, mythology, and culture to the Greek-speaking world. So, Berosus was a priest of the Babylonian god Bel, Marduk, which suggests that he had a deep knowledge of Babylonian religion, astrology, and temple traditions. He lived during the Hellenistic period around the time of the Seleucid Empire, after Alexander the Great's conquest of the Near East. So that means the empire would have been fragmented after he passed, and the Ptolemaic dynasty would have been in control of Egypt at the time. And I think, the Seleucid Empire would have been in control of the Near East. His work reflects an attempt to reconcile and present Babylonian culture within a Hellenistic context. Interesting. So the Babyloniaca included the creation myths and the story of the Great Flood and Babylonian kings and historical records. Oh, interesting. So, going back to this, Berosus seems to have composed his work with a serious regard for truth. He was a Babylonian by birth and flourished in the reign of Alexander the Great and resided for some years at Athens. Okay. That's interesting. So he's a Babylonian by birth, born over there. He's a historian. And he's a priest of Belus. Okay, so Belus and Bel, right, Marduk are the same. He possessed every advantage which the records of the temple and the learning and traditions of the Chaldaeans could afford. He appears to have sketched his history of the earlier times from the representations upon the walls of the temple. From written and traditionary knowledge, he must have learned several points too well authenticated to be called in question and correcting the one by the other, and at the time this blending them as usual with mythology. He has produced the strange history before us. Okay, so mythology is like a well-known word used that time period. That's just interesting to point out. The first fragment preserved by Alexander Polyhistor is extremely valuable. It contains a store of very curious information. The first book of the history apparently opens naturally enough with the description of Babylonia. Okay. Wait, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this episode because I don't want to scroll all the way back, but I forget who has a good concept of the antediluvian world, or maybe I'll scroll back up later. I'll have to look that up. The first history of the book, Then, referring to the paintings, the author finds this first series a kind of preface to the rest. All men of every nation appear assembled in Chaldea. All men of every nation appear assembled in Chaldea. Among them is introduced a personage who is represented as their instructor in the arts and sciences and informing them of the events which had previously taken place. What the hell? Alright, dude, this book kind of blows my mind at times, so let's stop talking about it. So, Chaldea we know is Sumeria, and we know Sumeria has Sumerian texts, and we also know that the Sumerians talk about the A word. I don't really want to start using some of these type of words sometimes, because then I get like flagged for it, or maybe shadow banned, so I'm just gonna say the ant people, maybe. I'll just say that. I think that's a good word for them. Maybe not necessarily that's what they are, but this story, if you look up the story that's in Sumeria of like cosmogony, I guess, you're gonna see this kind of same story, that all men of every nation appeared and assembled in Chaldea, in Sumeria, and then there's somebody who is represented as their instructor in the arts and sciences, and basically teaching man how to become civil. There's a particular group, I don't want to say it, but they're basically, if you look up that story, it's kind of what this is saying, but it's very interesting because there's no excavations that have been done quite yet based on this book of that area, because they're not calling it Sumeria, and the texts only are called Chaldea. So it's hard to point, it's kind of hard to see that if you really have no context. So this book it means nothing to nobody who knows really nothing about history. So that's why with inductive history, I like to break these down and annotate and commentate, because there's a lot of people who really still don't know history and maybe are curious, or maybe want to see some of these really older books and more older sources of books that we don't really see anymore, because I'll be honest with you, in today's world and in the recent world, we're kind of not exploring the world like these people used to. There's not many people. Everybody's so limited, and most of the information people just get on the internet, and it's not as reliable as it used to be. Or maybe not necessarily reliable, but the way information was extracted and put into words back then was completely different than it is now, because of the traveling limitations and maybe the exposure to context, and also I guess honestly political interest. I'd say political when I say political interest, I mean the histories pertaining to a country that would be considered infringement on their country if you say anything else about their country's origins. And that's kind of what I mean. And, it's quite interesting, so I really want to continue, and I'm going to finish up this page, to be honest, and then maybe speak a little bit more. Let's see. Okay, so unconscious that Noah is represented under the character of Owanis. Okay, so who is Owanis? Let's check out when ChatGPT pulls up. It's a figure from ancient Mesopotamian mythology and the lore of the Babylonians. And it says Sumerians, but this wouldn't have been. It's a half man and half fish. Oh my gosh. taught about culture. That's kind of scary. The O1 is said to have emerged from the Persian Gulf during the day and appeared to the ancient Babylonians in the form of a being with the body of a fish and the head and feet of a man. At night he would return to the sea. Dude, what? Freaking ChatGPT, dude, just makes it so excuse my French, but it just fucking dumbs it down. He's sometimes referred as a culture hero, divine being that provides early humans with skills and knowledge needed for civilization. That's a really bad way to put it. Like, using the word culture hero, it makes it sound like a human. You know, it's just, okay, so Berosus describes him from the hieroglyphical delineation as a being literally compounded of a fish and a man, and as passing the natural instead of the diluvian night in the ocean, with other circumstances indicative of this character and life. Yeah, it's just, well, I'll go on to the next page right now, but I'm going to end it here. Dude, this is just really interesting stuff, man. I mean, every time I open this book, it's just really interesting. There's all these old books I just want to look at and read through and see what they're saying, dude, because some of it is just like this stuff is not, it's not religious in any sort of way. It's not being like an atheist and just being some sort of like, what's his name? Something Dawkins, I don't know, like all this weird atheist, like evolutionary hardcore. Like, I'll be honest with you, I don't really buy evolution too much, honestly. I don't think it really is observable, and it's hard for humans to prove it because it's such a, I think honestly evolution's a very slow, naturally it's a very slow process. I think it's just way out of the observable humans' capabilities. You can look up the fruit fly experiment, for example, and trying to speed up evolution, and it's just like, it doesn't work. The selective breeding just kind of takes forms that are otherwise like not what we would expect an outcome. Like, for instance, like for the fruit fly experiment, they're trying to make the fruit flies adapt to the Venus fly traps, I think, and getting them trapped. And when they're trying to make I don't know if it's just like they're trying to make them like actually like intellectually adapt through like more generations of them breeding of the fruit flies, basically, and they'll be like, oh, we've learned genetically to avoid these things, or like they're trying to see if like a mutation will develop, and it's like there's so many possible outcomes, and then all of them would be possible, but for the one to survive the longest and to keep moving forward is just, I don't know, it becomes like out of the human mind. And that's how I feel like with evolution. And I'm going to say one more thing, actually, and this is a very important thing, and really ponder this for a moment. Please really ponder this, that things are much easier to degenerate than for them to evolve.